So after over 2 years in the making, Disney Plus has finally gone live, and there's a lot of cool content out there, like The Mandalorian and Lady and the Tramp and High School Musical, the musical, the series. But once all that new stuff is done, once you've watched all that new content, what are you going to do with this brand new streaming service? That's where this show comes in. Each week we're going to be talking about a different movie or TV show that you should be watching on Disney Plus. This week we're talking about the cult classic Newsies with Christian Bale. So relax, grab a snack as we go deep in the plus. So for our deep cut, we picked Newsies. You watch Newsies. Just going back to watching this again, what was your overall impression of it?
I love Newsies when it came out. So the year was 1992. I was a teenager in high school, and, high school girls wanted to go watch cute boys sing and dance on the big screen. So this was like a big deal to me and my friends from high school. So I have a lot of that nostalgia wrapped up in this, going back into watching this movie again. But I was a little surprised at how slow it feels the second time around.
Okay.
There's a lot less story there than I remember. And so much of it is filled by the music, which is great. There's great music numbers, there's great dance numbers, and it feels like a Broadway musical on the screen, which I appreciate. And I think they put a lot of time and effort into that. But there were definitely times where I was thinking, I don't remember this movie feeling so slow. It had a great hook for the nostalgia all over again, but at the same time, it didn't hold my interest as much as I thought it might.
So here's the thing for me, though. I don't know that I remember seeing it at the time, and because Swing Kids, also with Christian Bale, came out right after this, I literally had, this feeling as I was rewatching this movie that at some point they were going to become, part of the Nazi youth, and I'm like, how would that happen? This is very strange. So, because it was both those movies were very similar, I got them a little bit confused in my head. It's been a minute since I've actually watched this movie. So when I sat down to watch it again, I thought it has all of these elements together, right? It has all these elements, it has Kenny Ortega, who we now know is an amazing director and choreographer. It has music of Alan Menken. It has Christian Bale when he was right off of Empire of the Sun. So, it has all of these elements and the elements of a classic Disney musical, but it was a bust at the box office. I mean, it was the thing cost $15 million to make, and it made two, and yet it has been so popular since then. So I feel like it was you and all those other girls who probably fueled it into being this cult classic. It is a cult classic, don't you think?
I think it is. The other thing that I remember, so talking about the Alan Menken music, I was stunned at how many of the lyrics that I still remember to this day. I haven't seen this movie in the better part of 20 years, but I had the soundtrack on cassette tape. If for those of you out there that remember cassette tapes,
look it up,
kids. And I remember so many of the songs because I think going to see the movie in the theater was a big deal to me, but what made it last for me as a thing that I remembered so fondly was the music. And this was right in the thick of Alan Menken doing Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin and all of those other huge Disney animated films that we still know all the words to today as well. So that I think is one of the things that made it such a cult classic was the music was so good and people remember it so well for that.
All right, I got a question for you. You ready?
Yeah.
So, as a lover of this soundtrack, one of the themes that goes through it over and over again, to me, for no particular reason, is "Seize the Day." So, a lot of the songs, they use the same phrase, "Seize the Day." Do you think that had anything to do with the fact that 2 years before they started filming this, Dead Poets Society was a huge... Is that a weird question? I kept hearing it thinking... Was it reminiscent of the time, the whole "Seize the Day" thing?
Interestingly, both were sort of these movies that came out that appealed to teenage girls because they starred a bunch of cute teenage boys. So maybe. Maybe they were subliminally trying to prey on us and suck us in and be like, hey, remember that other movie with cute boys you like? This is just like that, except with dancing.
I could not shake it. Okay, so here's another thing that kind of bothered me. And are you ready for this?
Uh-huh.
You're sitting down. You're ready for this.
I
So
am.
the three lead characters, the Newsy characters. So there's Christian Bale as Jack Kelly. There's David Moscow as David Jacobs. That was like a real stretch for him, David and David. And then the little kid that played Les, David's little brother, is Luke Edwards. So Jack, David, and Les were the characters' names. After that, everybody was defined like one of the seven dwarfs by something that they did. There was one like
crutchy.
Right, crutchy, exactly.
Whatnot.
Like the kid who has a crutch, his name is Crutchy. The kid who keeps losing at the racetrack, his name is Racetrack. I mean, like, I'm looking down this list. Spot, Boots, Mush, Snitch, Itty, Specs, Dutchy, Snotty. Like, what the heck? I mean...
So, interestingly, historically, Jack's character was not a real person, but a Racetrack was a real kid who was one of the leaders of the actual newsboy strike in 1899.
Man, you went really deep for this deep cut, didn't you?
I went deep with this. So okay. I went and did I was reading like microfiche of old issues of the New York Times from the actual newsboy strike in 1899.
Did you say microfiche?
Yes, I said microfiche.
Okay.
Again, kids, look it up.
Yeah.
So one of the leaders of the actual newsboy strike, his name was Kid Blink. Like, that's what they called him. That's what the newspapers called him. So I guess that was a thing. I mean, all of these kids were like, most of them were orphans or only had one parent or, you know, were street kids. So I think that's sort of what the culture was at the time. But yes, I think it's funny. But at the same time, like, Spot Conlon was a real character. So, like, a real person who existed and was part of this whole thing back in 1899. So... to an extent, I think it's funny, but to an extent, it is drawn from reality.
Well, now you're bumming me out because, like, I thought, oh, okay, well, they just didn't take the time to name these kids. So you're saying it's historically accurate because there is a Kid Blink listed and there is a Spot, and I mean, like, so those guys were real, but like Snitch and Dutchy and Bumlets. I mean, Pie Eater. Can we talk about that one? Good Lord!
But I imagine he liked pie.
Yeah, so why didn't, like, Jack, David, and Les have, like, these newsy names?
Well, I find it interesting that there was a leader of the strike in reality, and his name was Kid Blink, and David was another one of the leaders. So I find it interesting that they created a David character, but they totally made up this Jack Kelly character, and it was not based on the real person, or at least the name wasn't based on the real person.
Okay, so this was a bum at the box office. It became such a cult classic that someone decided to make an actual Broadway musical out of it, and it's still touring. So, have you seen the musical?
I have not.
Okay.
I would like to.
Well, good news. It is actually going to be on Disney Plus. The musical version will also be on Disney Plus when it launches, so you get to watch that too. Yeah,
so I think that would be an interesting comparison to see what the film version of the musical from 2017, how it stacks up against the original from 1992. I mean, this is kind of a Hairspray sort of thing where they made a movie and it was a cult classic, and then they made it into I don't remember if the musical came first and then the movie based on the musical came. I guess so it was the same where they made movie, musical, and the movie again based on the musical. And, you know, that's been a big success, so why not Newsies?
Yeah, why not? So overall, because you said you're like was it angsty Gen Xer or a jaded Gen Xer, which is the one that you identify as?
All of the above.
All of the above. So then, that said, would you recommend this movie?
I struggle with that because there's so much. So this is the beginning of Disney Plus, and we're just getting into, we're like, literally, it's, hey kids, here's a candy store, we're throwing open the doors, come in and sample whatever you want. So in that context of the audience is coming in here with this huge library of Disney goodies to sample, should they go to Newsies first? I don't know. I think if you are a person that remembers this movie fondly from the 90s, then yes, go watch it again because it brought back a lot of good memories. I enjoyed that walk down memory lane. I loved hearing all the music again. But would it be the first thing I would want to turn on when I watch Disney Plus? Probably not. The thing I noticed most in some of the dance numbers is that Christian Bale was not a great dancer. So he would like flub steps, or they would just put him all the way in the back so that you couldn't see him flubbing the steps. So that is, a fun thing to look out for if you're watching this movie, is watching Christian Bale not be the best dancer when it comes to. And it was, I mean, in fairness, it's some relatively complex choreography here and there, so.
Well, I don't know if you watched the making of stuff, but I did watch the making of. I didn't go into the microfiche for my new information. I went into the making of, and they were talking about how amazing he was he wouldn't practice things forever. Then they would tell him just before he had to do it, and then he would do it, and he'd be amazing. And I kind of agree with you. I don't think he was amazing. I think he was very stiff. I was trying to probably compare what he was doing to, like, say, Zac Efron in High School Musical, which I know you haven't seen, but it's I feel like he had a little bit, he looked a little more natural than Christian Bale did. But whether this is truly, I feel like this actually happened. He jumped up on top of that horse. I was impressed by that. Like all dancing was forgiven at that point when he literally jumped on the back of a horse and rode off. That was pretty amazing.
It was a very Orlando Bloom in the Two Towers kind of moment where you're just like, wow, that was an amazing move that I'm pretty sure you could never do again if you tried.
You think that happened in one take and they were like, never again?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
I think it absolutely did. Yeah.
Okay. So
the other comment I want to make about Christian Bale in this movie is he was 18 when this movie was filmed, and I feel like he looks like he's like, relatively speaking, 5 years have passed. Even though this movie is like 27 years old, it does not look like Christian Bale has aged 27 years since this movie came out.
Okay.
So A+ to whatever he's doing to keep himself young.
Kombucha.
Mm-hmm.
That's all he eats. He just drinks kombucha.
That's literally all that's flowing through his veins.
Yep. So one of the things that I kept looking at when I was watching Max Casella, who was in Doogie Howser, is that he was also Timon on Broadway and The Lion King. So I actually got to see him on Broadway doing The Lion King. So, like, for me, like, I kind of hear, like, pitches of Timon when he's talking for some reason.
Okay. Yeah.
But he was really good. I mean, I was, like, blown away at seeing him in that role. So it was really neat to see him as a kid doing this whole racetrack character, too. And like that this was the beginning maybe of his singing and dancing career. Who knows?
Yeah, maybe. I personally liked David Moscow. If you were a fan of the film Big with Tom Hanks, David Moscow played young Tom Hanks in the movie. And I feel like his career kind of, he peaked at this point in time. And I don't think he's really done a whole lot of anything remarkable since then. But he was one of my favorite characters. He was one of my favorite characters in the movie when I saw it originally, for sure. Like that sort of like smart but quiet type, as opposed to the loudmouth Christian Bale kind of character. It was definitely more up my alley. But even so, I think he was a very good actor in this and held up really well.
The thing that I find interesting about this movie and us going back to looking at it right now is that we are a week away from the release of Ford versus Ferrari, and another Christian Bale movie that is now actually going to be a Disney movie because it's a Fox movie, one of the first ones they released as after they bought the company. So to me, I find that's kind of like a full circle moment. Maybe just another reason to go back and watch this movie right now. So hopefully people will go back and watch it along with all the rest of the stuff that the Disney Plus has to offer, and we'll keep pitching ideas of things that you could watch.
Yep, go check out that library because it's a good one.
So each week we're going to pick our own favorite deep cut from the Disney Plus library. This week, Jill, what you like?
My pick for this week is Disney's Adventures of the Gummy Bears.
Mm.
So this was an animated series that was on 1985 to 1991. So it had 6 seasons. By the last season, it actually was part of the first year of the Disney Afternoon. I know there's a lot of Disney Afternoon retro nostalgia stuff going on, especially down in the parks. So if you're into that, I feel like Gummy Bears gets overlooked. Everybody's all about uh, DuckTales now that it's got a reboot, and Tailspin and Rescue Rangers, but people forget that the Gummy Bears were part of the Disney Afternoon. Um, but for me, it was a great show. Again, being a kid in the 80s and early 90s, this was 100% something I came home from school every day and watched. Knew all the theme song words by heart, still do to this day, sadly, or not. And also, it was so much fun. And to me, it harkens back to a different era of cartoons. That's what I remember and love from my childhood. And also had a ton of awesome voice actors. So the last season of the show, Jim Cummings did the voice of Zummy Gummy. Um, there were also June Foray, who did the voice of Rocky the Squirrel, and Cindy Lou Who from How the Grinch Stole Christmas. So there's a lot of good voice acting going on in this show as well. But I highly recommend checking it out. They were fun, short episodes, so you can just pick one up here and there when you've got a few minutes to throw something on the TV. It's perfect. You don't have to commit to it and can just, enjoy yourself and have a little fun here and there and drink some gummy berry juice.
Okay, so my pick is from the Disney Plus content deep cut is The Rocketeer, because that was one of my favorite movies when I was a kid. I loved that movie. I loved everything about it. And the thing is that I think now it is super slow. Like, I think the pacing wise, it's a little bit slow, but it's still just a classic, cult classic Disney movie. Cliff Secord as the Rocketeer, and Peavy, and the Bulldog Cafe. I mean, they used to have the Bulldog Cafe on the backlot tour at Hollywood Studios back in the day, and that was really cool for me to see. There's still a Peavy's over in Hollywood Studios where you can look and see that the jetpack is still there, and the helmet. You can take a picture of it. I think I take a picture of it like every time I go. So I'm just a huge fan of this. I wish there would be a reboot. I know they talked about a Disney Junior special, like a show about it, which I would probably not watch. But I'm glad at least they're, kids are getting exposed to it. But that was one of my favorites and continues to be my favorite. And I wish there was more Rocketeer merchandise.
So what do you remember loving about it so much when it came out?
Honestly, I probably had a little bit of a crush on Jennifer Connelly.
Okay.
So that. Also, I was a big James Bond fan, and so the fact that Timothy Dalton is in it as the bad guy was interesting to me, and that he would be playing the bad guy after he had been James Bond. Because it seems wrong. It seems like James Bond's being a bad guy. What's up with that? But the whole Howard Hughes thing, that was kind of cool. I don't know, just a lot of that. I love the Griffith Planetarium being in there. The whole airship battle that they had, where they fought on top of the airship, was a little bit cheeseball, but for some reason, again, as a kid, I kind of like that.